Okay, let's go. Welcome, 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 everybody. My name is Danielle Stein-Fairhurst. I'm a financial modelling specialist based in Sydney, Australia, and I run these sessions from time to time on topics that are interesting, I hope, and relevant for financial modelers. And I just heard about Chris Barber recently, and I can't believe I haven't met him before. He is also a Microsoft MVP, as am I, but he specializes in Power BI and using the semantic model. And what really caught my attention was the fact that he builds profit and loss statements or income statements using the semantic model. So I'm really interested in hearing what he has to say for us today. He's based in London, and for us who are used to using Excel, a P&L is built in Excel, whereas Chris is going to tell us all about building it using the semantic model. So I'll pass over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the kind introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm going to go through a whole bunch of things today. Hopefully, you find it really interesting. I'm willing to take questions as we go. So if you want to either ping them on the chat or just mention and come off mute and ask your questions, feel free to do so. Okay, so today kind of going to cover through four sections broadly. First of all, just going to do a bit of a level set, just talk about the P&L. I'm sure this audience is more than aware, but just explain what the P&L is. In this section, I'm going to kind of cover two different demos. I've got one which is kind of an advanced P&L demo, and then which is using Power BI only. And then the second demo is all around using Fabric, because with Fabric we can do some other things on top as well, like write back commentary and write back budgets, plans, and forecasts. The second part, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges around doing this, and I'm going to cover sort of the basic modeling approach that I take for building out these financial statements. We're then going to move on to looking at user-defined functions. These are a really new thing in Power BI, but what they are effectively is reusable blocks of code. So when we look at the original demos, what you'll see is there's lots of code, lots of DAX in there, can be quite challenging. But the sort of inherent structure of our financial statements based on credits and debits means that we can sort of reuse the same code over and over again. And we can do this using something called user-defined functions. And there's a public library where you can get all this data. And then the final section, any talk on data would be incomplete if you don't touch upon generative AI. So I kind of got to talk to you about generative AI. This is all around how you can chat with your data, and also how you can build out things like financial commentary using AI. It's really important to note that the semantic model really is the hub for all of this, right? So whether you chat with your data, whether you use Excel, whether you use Power BI, you basically all send your questions to the semantic layer. So building out that semantic layer is really, really important. Okay, let's dive in and let's go into the first section. And I'll try and keep up with the chat, but keep me honest if I miss anything.
Will do.
So P&L, very basically, how much money you're making or how much you're losing. So I always like to explain the P&L using a Sankey diagram. I believe this is the best diagram for explaining the P&L, because effectively it shows all of our sort of our revenue flowing into the business, which you can see here. And then what we have is our various costs flowing out. So once we get to our revenue figure, we can see that our costs of revenues are flowing out. And that leaves us with our gross profit. And from our gross profit, we take out things like our operating expenses, so things like R&D, sales, etc., leaving us with our operating profit. And in most jurisdictions, we pay tax, not all, as I find out when I speak to some clients. And that leaves us with our net profit. And then the final section, I would say 95% of the companies I deal with have this concept of controlling and non-controlling interests. You might not have to worry about that within your company, but that's effectively where you own subsidiaries, but you don't own 100% of that subsidiary. So you could own 75% of it. The financial implications are slightly different in different regions, but typically something around 50. If you own 50% or more, you show it in your non-controlling interest. This actually is a Power BI report, so I can kind of play around with it and I can kind of change the quarters and everything. If you want to know how to build out Sankey diagram, there's a 5-step blog on my website which will talk you through this. There's a
Cool.
few
It's
sort of
almost it's
features,
almost
custom.
worth using Power BI just to get a Sankey diagram because it's so hard to do in Excel.
Yeah, it certainly is hard to do it. So I'm not going to pretend it's trivial in Power BI. And there's this is using a custom visual called Deneb. And then what I've done is I've written the code in Vega, Vega or Vega Lite. I can't quite remember one of those two languages, but it's all on the website. You can download it, but I would advise you to follow through it. But yeah, I think it's quite useful to be able to kind of build out a Sankey diagram. You can do some really fun stuff to get the variances. All right. So P&L. Okay. So more typically, this is our P&L statement. The problem with this though is it's not very dynamic, right? So we can have a P&L statement like this, but what we really want when we're doing internal reporting is we want something that's dynamic, and that's going to lead us on to our first demo. So this is the first of 3 demos that I'm going to go through today. So this is a financial statement. You can either interact with this one on my website, it's embedded, or you can download the file and play with it yourself. It is quite a beefy file. There's, I think, something like 50 million records or something in there. So you'll need a half decent laptop to get it to run, but it will work. So we have
Is this
our
one of the
our
ones
P&L.
that you've got on your website, Chris? On your blog?
Yeah, it's on my website. There's embedded on my website.
Okay, that's the
So,
one. Yeah, yeah, on your
so
homepage.
if you go to Power BI report, there's sort of a section of different
Oh, yeah,
reports
there
here,
it is.
diagrams. There's different ones. There's a few different flavors of similar-ish type reports.
Mm.
It is a little bit slower on the embedded because it's just a free kind of version that I've got set up there. I'm not paying for capacity or anything. Um, yeah, so here is our P&L statement. So the nice thing about this is I can set this up and I can look at it's all dynamic. So I'm looking at the current month now, but I can kind of flip over to looking at quarter to date and I'll get my quarter to date figures. I can also down here in the bottom right hand corner, I can also look at different FX assumptions. So at the moment, I'm looking at comparing our actuals versus plan, forecast, etc. at the overall rate, but I can also look at it at the underlying rate and I can look at it using the FX component. So this is really important when you want to just judge the underlying performance of the business, excluding the impact of FX. There's kind of a couple of different ways of doing this, but typically the most common way that I see is that we retranslate the actuals at the appropriate rate. So when we log the actuals, we get them at the transaction currency they're in, and we can retranslate them at prior year rate or at forecast rate or at budget rate. So the rates I assumed when I did my budget or when I did my forecast. You'll see that the number of columns has changed to bring this in. So it's a fully dynamic solution. And I've also got the FX component in here as well. So now I can just see the FX component. So you can see hopefully how powerful it is as well. All right, I maybe come back to this and we can look at it a bit more in depth. But yeah, this is kind of the power of using Power BI, right? Is you can build really dynamic P&L solutions. You can have lots of different views. I've got here, down here as well, different sort of layout views of the P&L. So I've got an internal view at the moment. So you can see I've got things like percentages showing. I've also got an external view as well. And in that, it shows the number of shares, for instance, which I wouldn't typically show on an internal report, but I would if I was producing a kind of an external facing report. Okay, so those are the kind of the core elements that we see across different businesses. You'll then have your bespoke elements in which way you analyze your accounts, and this really is very business dependent. So it depends on your organization, but the typical types of things that we see are things like legal entity. So for instance, here I've got the legal entity structure here of my company. Legal entity, I would say that 8 times out of 10, legal entity is used to control security. Because what we want to do is if you have access to the parent company, you then have access to all of the associate subsidiaries. Let me just quickly flip to my slides and show you what I mean. So for instance, I've got a CFO called Almeida. She has the CFO, so she has access to company holdings, and then that security should then propagate all the way through the entire organization. But if I have someone, Clayton, for instance, I can give them access to Company Logistics US, and that will just flow down through their hierarchy, and then so on and so forth. So I can have her, who's a finance manager in Canada, only access to one legal entity. And the beauty of setting up security this way is it can flow throughout your organization, but also it then works regardless of whether you're accessing your semantic model the way that I'm showing you here in Power BI, but also if I ask questions in natural language, it will also obey the security rules. So if Hertha says, what's my revenue? It won't show her the group revenue. It'll go to semantic. It'll apply the security. And the same in Excel as well. Okay, that's kind of the first little part of demo, just sort of showing you what is possible within Power BI. I'm now going to move on to show you what's possible within Fabric, because there are some. Go on, go on.
Before you move
Yeah.
on, Chris, I just wanted to ask about the security that you described. So
Yes.
that's a pretty cool feature. Do you need to have, what sort of license do you need in order to get that working?
So you can just use the Power BI. It's just the Power BI standard row level security.
So you don't
Uh,
need any
so you don't need any special licensing. No.
above, like any Power BI license that's got that.
Yeah, any Power BI license will have it. So obviously, if you do it on the free license, you can't share your reports with anybody. But if you've got a pro license,
Of
you can
course.
share your
Yes.
reports. Yeah, so the usual licensing.
Yes. Hmm.
Um, yeah, the way it works is you basically give access to the legal entity that the user has access to, and then it propagates through the hierarchy. If I could quickly show you. So we have, let's quickly build it out. So yeah, so we have a security legal entity. I was planning on doing this, but I can quickly do it. So let's get a user. So let's do Almeida. Oh, let me just write down a name because I'm going to make a mistake. Let's do Lona.star because that's nice and easy. And I've called my company at company.com, but obviously you wouldn't call that right. This would be based on your company, whatever yours is called, right? So if I go to view as legal entity, and I have to impersonate somebody else. At the moment, it's logged on as me, so I have to basically impersonate somebody else. So if I go loner.starcompany.com, I'm now impersonating Lona. What should happen is if we go through, there you go. You can see the numbers have now updated following through that security, and they're now limited down to only those entities that Lona can see. If I go to my legal entity table, there you go. So Lona can only see Company Logistics Limited, Company Tech Limited, and Company Investments Limited.
That's really
And
useful.
there's a path here showing the path of organisations that you can see. So Lona's got access at the third level of the hierarchy.
Hmm.
So Company Investments Limited. Let me just pop back to my slides. I think the two are lined up. Yeah, so Lona's got access here at Company Investments Limited, which I'm showing here, which is then given access to these two companies as well. Yeah, so that's how the security propagates. And it's really useful to try and use the legal entity structure in order to do this. It just makes your life a lot easier than having to grant it out to each individual user. You can also see security from another direction as well, which is the business unit. I haven't got this one set up with this demo, but you can say, I'm only allowed access to see revenue lines, or I'm only access to see sales and marketing lines. So that's the other way that you would typically see security, but that's less common. Yeah. All right. Any questions? RS is a bit hard to maintain, but worth investing time in. Yes, it is. Yeah. So especially now, people access the data in different ways. People don't want. So there's a question in the chat from Rachel about RLS being a bit hard to maintain. It is, but it is worth investing the time in to set your security up properly, because people will access your data from a range of different ways. They will have a conversation with it through natural language. They will play with it in Excel, and they will also play with it in Power BI. If you haven't got your security set up properly, you will be in trouble basically, and you'll be sharing data that you don't want to be sharing. So yes, difficult, and there's a little bit of nuance to it, but it needs to be done correctly. What's the underlying financial data? Good question. So Henry's asked a question as well. So one of the things that we can also do with this report is this report goes all the way down to the individual document ID. So I mentioned that it's got tens of millions of rows in this example. What that means is I can select an individual line like net income. And what I can do with that is I can, from net income, I can see that the variance versus plan is plus 41. And from that, I've got a kind of a decomposition tree that I can kind of drill into. So I've got net income selected, and I'm going to go over to my decomposition tree. Now, this is now showing that plus 41 and how that plus 41 has happened. So plus 41 has happened is because I've got plus 429 from revenue, and I've got 387 more of expenses than I expected, which balances out to my 41. There's a little bit of rounding in there, but that's effectively what's happening. The decomposition tree is quite a useful way to start from your, because if you've got millions and millions of records, you can't show millions and millions of numbers on your screen. But what you can do is you can start high level and you can use a decomposition tree to kind of go, okay, I want to drill into this number. And from there, I can go, okay, my 429, these are the accounts. From the accounts, these are the regions. From the regions, these are the country. And from the country, these are
Mm.
the fiscal periods that are affected. So I picked quarter to date, so that's why it picked period 7 and period 8. I'm pretending it's August in this example. Yeah. And then from there, you could go down to the individual journal entries if you wanted to. I mean, it's kind of, you have to kind of have a kind of a staged way of going through the data. You can't just kind of show it all. Yeah.
Mm.
All right. So that's kind of demo number 1.
Mhm.
This is great because it's a report and I can interact with it and I can drill into it and I can discover results.
Yeah.
There's always been a challenge that, hey, in Excel, I can just update my numbers. Bit more difficult with Power BI, right? There's some very complicated ways that you've been able to do it historically, but
Mm.
they are tricky. I'm not going to go into the weeds, but there is a new feature, preview feature. So as always, when we're doing a preview feature, something could go wrong here with the demo, but we're gonna go for it anyway. So I also want to be able to write data back
Oh.
to my model. Okay. All right. Now to do that, I'm moving out of Power BI and I'm moving into Fabric. So Fabric is basically it's an umbrella term for a whole bunch of products, including Power BI actually. But Fabric gives us some other functionality. So for instance, databases and something called user data functions.
Mm.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pick a particular number. So this is a Power BI report. Um, I'm going to pick a particular number and I'm going to change that number. Let's go increase it by 500 and I'm going to click update. And this is going to update the number. Now, the first time I do this, it's going to be slower.
Mm.
What's happening behind the scenes is there is a Spark compute spinning up.
Mhm.
Um, but once I've spun up that compute, it should now be quicker.
Did that just change? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
they've
Right.
updated. Sorry, they've updated.
So how does that work? Does that add another record to the original record? So how does it work?
Yeah, so let's talk through how this is working in the
Yeah,
background.
really
So
cool.
what's happening here is um, I'm selecting the number, I'm
Mhm.
typing in the number I want to happen, and I'm hitting update. That's calling a notebook in Fabric, which is basically some Python script. What that is doing is that is adding a row to my database. It's also recording the date, the time, and who did it. Okay,
Right.
because
So you
because
can
it knows
see
who I am. It
where
knows
it
who I
came
am. It knows the date.
from.
And it knows the time. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. So basically, you can
Very
then
cool.
have write back in order to do that all in the background. The Python script and everything is on my GitHub. Okay, it's not on my website, but if you follow my website, there's a link to my GitHub on there. All right. So really powerful. So typically the way you do this is you have what's known as a composite model. You kind of play around and then you commit all of your changes at the end. You can also do things which is a bit fun. So this is a bit more of a advanced solution here than the last one I showed you, because you can pick what period you want. You can effectively time travel. You can say, for the prior period, what was the quarter to date, and it'll do actuals plus forecast and go forward. But the thing I can also do is, let's just pick something. I can pick a particular period and I can write back my financial commentary as well. So test. Or actually, let's write it a bit more interesting than test. So I can say, net income was up plus 341 versus plan due to higher than expected service and other revenue. So I can do this, and if I just commit that, there we go, submit it in. And again, this is writing back, so very similar to what I just showed you. I should get a confirmation. So I'm just using not a very extensive Spark compute. Obviously, you can pay more and more for what you want, but I'm keeping it. But there we go. And we can see now on my Power BI report, net income was up 341 due to high expected service versus other revenue. Lovely.
So there's a
Okay,
couple
so
of questions in there, Chris. Just a few questions in the chat.
Yes.
Rahini's just asking if the financial statement on the previous example is consolidated. It is just a consolidated financial statement, right?
Yeah, just a consolidated financial statement. Yeah. Obviously, it's all dummy data and everything. So
yeah, and and Henry's asking if all accounting system down to individual journals. You can do it down at that level, can't you?
Yeah, and I'll kind of go more into the weeds of how that works a bit later on. But yeah, so you can see here. Oh, so this is only a small demo that I've got here. It's only 2.6 million rows. So I've just because
Only, yeah.
It's it's a small, yeah, but relatively to what some financial systems can kick out. So yeah, so you can see it goes down to the document ID. So just for the demo today, I've just done 2.6, but you can
Yeah. So you could
billions.
theoretically have, yeah,
Yeah.
wow. And Rachel's asking about whether row level security can be applied to the write back as well.
Yeah, it 100% is, right. So when you are looking at that report, it is only showing you. So I've got unrestricted access, but if I was
When
loaner
you're,
star, when I'm writing it, I could only write back to that legal
yeah.
entity. Yeah,
So you don't have
yeah.
to specify who gets access. It's just for that area. Whoever gets access to that area will be able to see it.
Yeah. So if you let me get this right. So for the write back, you typically want a different set of users. So it's not just, you could have Lona has access to only those three companies, and therefore she's the person who can write back to that company and she can view it. But you could also have Lona views those three companies, but somebody else in a different role is responsible for maintaining the actual budgets and forecasts. It kind of depends on the roles and responsibilities, right? Lona might be a more senior manager, might not do any of the write back. So you can kind of configure it how you want to configure it. It's not always a one-to-one. And this is it. To be honest with you, this is very new. This is preview feature, this one that I'm showing you here. So I haven't actually
I mean, this is
implemented
just
this
like
within a client yet. It's very new.
it's a whole accounting system, budgeting and forecasting system. This is like you could do everything in here by the look of it.
Yeah, yeah. But it's like I said, it is very, very new preview feature, but it is there. But I think it's really powerful what you can do for it. You have to set it up. So I'll quickly show you the Python scripts. So is it user function. So this is all synced to my GitHub, so you can get it from there. And here we go. I'll quickly show you what the code looks like that's doing that. So this is the code that's linked to the button when you say add in 500. This is the code that it's running. So you can see I've linked this to I've got a connection into my SQL database here. I've just given it the alias profit and loss. And you can see it's doing this insert into, and it's inserting into the date, the key, the scenario, the legal entity, the credit less debit value. I'm not actually logging the user or anything in here in this demo particularly, but I have got in some of my other demos. It all comes through. Yeah, so you can do what you want, but there's loads of flexibility, but also you have to have a very clear vision of what you're doing, right? So flexibility can be both a feature and a bug, right? It can be, because it's Python, you can do anything, right? But also there's a challenge in being able to do everything because you have to kind of have a really clear vision about what it is you want to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Henry, I'm just doing P&L here today. You can do balance sheets and cash flows. There's an article on my website around the differences of doing P&L and balance sheet. A balance sheet is just a fundamentally different table. So when we do modeling within Power BI, we talk about facts and dimensions. P&Ls flow off these things called transactional facts, which are basically additive numbers. So your credit and debits and your P&L is additive. Your balance sheet is non-additive. So something called a snapshot fact table. So if you add the current assets for January, February, March, that's not your current assets for Q1. But if you add in your P&L, if you do that, that is you add your revenue for January, February, March, that is the revenue for Q1. Yeah, so you need a slightly different structure for balance sheet because it's a point in time calculation. Right. All right. 2 demos in. Okay. All right. I'm going to kind of skirt over this a little bit just in terms of time, but effectively, historically, we've not been able to do financial modeling, and the core theory from Kimball says basically you can't do financial statements easily within this model. And that leads us nicely into the challenges in doing this. So this is a little bit theory heavy, but I just want to cover a little bit of the theory just so we're kind of clear on how this is actually working under the hood. And I find this a lot easier than me just diving into the code. So I'm not going to focus on all of the challenges. What I'm going to focus in is one in particular, which is the fact that the subtotals are kind of non-additive. So we have here revenue, cost, and gross profit. So we're going to keep it really simple, just 3 lines on our financial statements. So our revenue is made up of accounts. So we have our trade revenue and returns. Our costs is made up of trade costs and trade discounts. And then our gross profit is made up of those 4 accounts that appear in revenue and cost. But obviously I can't just sum up those 4 accounts. It doesn't come back to the 52 because, as we're typically told, gross profit is revenue minus cost. Okay, but DAX doesn't kind of work that way. So the way we think about it is, instead of thinking of our net as revenue less cost, we think of every calculation is either credit less debit or debit less credits. And when we do that, our subtotal then starts to make sense. Okay, so we are actually trying to, rather than trying to calculate every line individually on the financial statements, which would be really, really painful, what we want to do is we want to simplify it down to, oh, am I doing a credit less debit calculation or am I doing a debit less credit calculation? And for subtotals, typically we're doing credit less debits. So hopefully you can see how that kind of all kind of adds up through. Obviously, sometimes a positive number is a negative impact. So we also need to make sure that when we're showing pluses, and if I go back to my previous example, obviously pluses need to be shown in red depending on the type of account, the type of calculation that we're doing. Okay. But then sometimes we want these calculations to be additive as well. So in this example, you can see that trade revenue plus returns plus costs plus discounts does equal back to 52 because I'm doing a credit less debit calculation everywhere. And that's when we want to do things like waterfall charts. So when we do a waterfall chart, we need everything to kind of, otherwise it's not going to work.
Right.
But you can see that the trade costs are debit less credit in one context and they're credit less debit in another.
Yeah, there's a question about that from Gary in the chat about whether you should do credit less debit. Is it because of the waterfall charts that you're doing it this way around, or is that just standard?
Yeah, just done it this way round for waterfall charts. The solution allows you to do it both ways because you need both basically. Because on our P&L, typically what you don't want to do, if I go back to my solution, the demo, you want you don't want to be showing these as negatives, right? They're negatives, but you don't want to be showing them in minus or in brackets. Typically, the typical way that they're presented is as the absolute numbers. And if you show them to most accountants, they'll go, no, I want that to be a positive number, even though it's a reduction from my net income.
Mhm.
Yeah. But when it's a waterfall chart, it needs to be the other way around. Yeah. So the answer is you just need to be able to do both, in my experience. Fortunately, there's a really simple mathematical calculation we can do. We can just take credit less debits and we can times it by -1, and that equals debits less credits. Okay. This is really, really important
Yes.
because when we're storing our data, we can just store one figure in our table, right? And obviously compression, storing data is really important for having an efficient solution, which gives you sort of sub 3-second responses. So we can have a single table which says the account, the date, and the credit less debit amount. But what we can do is in our account table, we have an indicator where we can take the max from it, and we can then just follow the relationship through. And we take the one which we stored initially and we multiply it by the 17, which basically just ends up as 17 again. But when I'm dealing with my cost lines, what I'm doing is the indicator, all my costs is going to be -1. So when I follow it through now, even though I'm storing everything as a credit less debit in my table, I'm able to convert it back to a debit less credit calculation because the account table contains the logic around that. And this
Yeah.
is just really efficient from a
Important.
storage perspective. Yeah. And you can
Yeah.
imagine if I'm dealing with, say, 8-9 billion rows of data, which I need to store in a fact table, it's really important to have the most efficient storage. And I want to be able to have the most granular detail because I want to be able to drill all the way from top to bottom. Because that's where the power, otherwise I could just do it in Excel, right? But the power of BI is that I can go all the way from top to bottom.
Yeah. 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 It's
All
important
right.
to get that right.
Yes, so that's the kind of core of how this is sort of fitting together. We then have a table which contains our financial statements layout. For revenue and cost, it's quite straightforward. It can just kind of link to the accounts. For subtotals, we have a from and to key. So it basically says, whenever I'm looking at a subtotal, I want you to grab lines revenue and cost. So gross profit, I want all of the accounts that exist within revenue and cost, and then it will just flow through the relationship exactly as it does done before. Because I want a credit less debit calculation, I'm going to choose the max of the indicator. So I'm going to choose, which will pick out a 1. If I wanted to debit less credit, I would put the min and it would do the -1 calculation. And that's how it flows through in order to calculate my gross profit. So the core here is that we want to store our data in the most efficient way possible. And we want to be able to store it at the most granular level. It's what's known as the atomic grain, because we want to give the complete flexibility to analyze all the way down through our model. And we do that by storing credits and debits and using the account to translate back and forth. Okay, and it's quite theory heavy little bit of the session, but hopefully kind of at a high level that makes sense why we're doing that, right? There's lots of different ways that you can do things, but we want the most efficient way.
Sounds good.
All right, let's not do that demo, but let's go into this. Right, so if we go back to our solution, So the challenge has always been to get this to happen, you have to write lots of code. And people don't like writing lots of code. So for example, if I go back to this solution, you can see there's kind of all these different steps. And at each level, there's kind of, it's building up and building up the code in order to do this, right? So it gets quite complicated and quite involved. We have something new. Again, another preview feature. This one is called, it's also called UDFs. It's the same. I said UDFs earlier. The UDFs earlier are user data functions. These are user defined functions. So Microsoft have come out with two abbreviations, same, just to make our life really difficult, okay, for us to understand things. But yeah, it is what it is. But what these effectively are is reusable blocks of code. I've actually committed and contributed to this program. So there's a program, there's a website called daxlibs.org. From there, you can get all of the code that people have generated that they share with other people. So it's not just P&L statements, it's formatting, it's spark lines, it's everything else as well. But from there, you can get my the stuff that I've contributed. But why do I want to use reusable code for the P&L? Well, it's because the output is basically the same, right? It doesn't matter whether you're a manufacturing company, whether you're a pharmaceutical company, your kind of your outputs, revenue, costs, EBITDA, these kind of things are basically the same, right? And your inputs also credits and debits, and therefore we can use our reusable code. I'll share the website. I should have done it before, but I'll share it after. In fact, it's daxlibs.org.
Libs.org. I'll see if I can find it. Yeah.
Yeah, just have a quick look for it. That's all right, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to quickly now go on to another demo. So, okay. So typically out of your finance system, you will have, and it does depend on which ERP system you're using, right? But typically you'll have the account, you will have the date, you'll have a document ID. That's what SAP S/4HANA gives you, but it can be different depending on whether you're using Dynamics or Oracle. And then you'll have your debit less credit or credit less debit value in there, and you'll have your accounts. So this is quite nice because I can get my accounts and I can get my sum, but that isn't a profit and loss and what I want to get to. So we then add in the layout table, which is what I showed you in the kind of the theory. This has all of my lines, has all of my keys, which enable me to do sorting, but also they link to my accounts. And then I have my subtotal from and to for all of my subtotals here. NCLD is net credit less debit, and DLC is net debit less credit. It's just a terminology that I use for doing it. So we've got our layout table, and what we can do is let's take out our account and let's just pop in our line names. So at the moment, it doesn't really look like a P&L because it's just summing up all of the lines which are connected to accounts. Okay, so it doesn't really work, right? Let's do a matrix visual. Let's bring this into here. Okay, so sales and marketing relates to all of these accounts. But what I can do is I've created this user defined function. So at the moment, I'm just summing the ledger, but I've actually created this function which exists within my model, and you can copy this function and you can reuse it over and over your model, different models. So this function is like this, and then all I need to put into it is pass through the sum of ledgers, and this function will create my P&L in full for me based on that layout table. So you can see it's now spat out a P&L correctly structured as I need to with the blanks and everything else in it. The nice thing about this is you don't need to understand, or you can look through the code and you can see all the code, but you don't need to necessarily understand all the functions. You can just call them. It's much like if you've ever done any Python or anything like that. I know how to use Python, but I don't need to know what the plot lib actual that I'm calling is actually doing right, I can just say I'm going to grab the work that somebody else has done. And you can pull that down from DAX libs. Did you find it? daclib.org. Yeah, well done.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Excellent. Yeah. And it sits within your model as a function. And you can see here it is within it. And you can sort of define and evaluate it and look at it as well. And once you've defined the function, you can use it over and over again. So I can use exactly the same thing for doing my plan as well. So I'm using the same function again to produce my plan. And it will produce my plan. And I can also do the same for all of my different credit less debits at different exchange rates. So I've got this kind of end solution, which is using the user-defined functions. The core here is that before you had to do lots of different steps of DAX. And in my book, I go through it. There's kind of 7, 8 steps of DAX that you have to go through in order to produce this. Now you just have to sum up your actuals, pass it through the function, and it will produce it for you. And if you want to really understand what it's doing under the hood, you can do. But ultimately, as long as you follow the structure, then you can reproduce for your organization.
So Thomas
I
is
used to,
asking about the Power Query calculating refresh.
yeah, so I'm not doing any Power Query refresh here, just because there's millions of rows, and I don't want you to all just sit here while it's loading in millions of rows. So I'm not doing a Power. I've already got the data loaded in prior to coming on this call. You just wouldn't want to wait and watch it spin. So no, it's not doing it each time. It is it's just changing the DAX. So you don't have to, when you change the DAX, you don't have to redo the Power Query.
Cool. How are we going
All
for
right, so
time, Chris? Have we got
oh
time?
yeah, 15 minutes. Let me cover the next bit, and then
Okay.
I'll take questions. Should
All
I?
right.
Yeah. Or do people want to do questions now,
No,
and I
no,
can?
it's if we have time, we'll let people unmute themselves. Otherwise, just pop your questions in the chat, depending on how we go for time.
Yeah. No, this final section won't take me too long, and I can show you lots of other things as well. So generative AI. It's a big topic. Every conversation I'm in have been for the last year at least has been okay, great, but I want to chat with my data as well. So I'll talk to you about a few different ways in which you can do that. So there's this option. So this is again, these are all Fabric options, right? So this isn't native Power BI because you need to consume compute in order to do this. This is kind of two main ways in which sort of seeing this being implemented. There's something called semantic link, which is a Fabric, something Microsoft have developed, which basically extracts your data from Power BI. And what you can do is you can extract all of your P&L. You can pass that through Synapse Data Science. You can use Databricks, something else, and pick your model. And you can say, okay, here's all of my data. Can you now write me a summary? And what you can do is then send that back to your Delta tables in Fabric, and then you can surface that back in Power BI again. Okay. No too much in detail, but there's something called semantic link. If you want to create financial commentary, as you can imagine, when you start slicing and dicing your P&L, you can quite quickly get to like millions of different views of your P&L. If you think about it, like all the legal entities, all your business units, current year, prior year, there's just so many different combinations. So you might want to get generative AI to go away and create the commentary for you.
Mhm.
The other thing that's available, another preview feature, so I'm just showing you all stuff that's new, right? So hopefully a lot of this you haven't seen before, is something called data agents. They were announced about 6 months ago, previously called something called AI skills, if you've come across that. And what this is this is a natural language conversation with your semantic model or a natural language conversation with your lakehouse. So yeah, again, you can use that, and basically what you're doing is you're chatting with your semantic model. So those are the kind of the generative AI ways. And then what you can do is you can say, rather than having a report, you can then ask questions of your data. Why has my net profit gone down? Da, da, da. But what I would say is, with this approach, it will give you reasons, not causes, why things happened. So you can ask questions like, what is my net profit? Okay, why is my net profit down against plan? And it will say things like research and development was down 10%, or this legal entity was down 5%, or this particular journal entry is really large. But what it won't do is tell you things which are the underlying root causes, which is what people typically want from commentary. So it won't say things like, I don't know, we had a outage in our factory and production was down for 2 days and therefore we couldn't produce our parts and that's why our revenue didn't come through. So it can give reasons and not causes. Okay. Now there's maybe ways around this. We're getting get too far down, but you can make the data agent you create in Fabric, which can give you deterministic answers. So you always want the same answer. That exposes an API which you can link into something called AI Foundry. So theoretically, you can have your deterministic answers coming from Fabric, and then you could link it to SharePoint where you had PowerPoints on it, which could contain loads of information. So that's maybe one way you can think about. But combining structured with the unstructured to give you causes, that's very challenging, very difficult to do. This is where we are today. But obviously, as we go forward, I think what finance people really want is the underlying causes, not the reasons. All right.
Right, great.
They are give you about 10 minutes for questions.
Yeah,
So
yeah, fantastic. I'm gonna just pop anyone who's got their hand raised, I'm gonna bring them on stage. We've also got a couple of questions in the chat. And on the Q&A. Oh, the questions are coming thick and fast. So do you want to, can you see the Q&A? So John's asking, how would this interact with forecasting, say an Excel model? Potentially there'd be flows both ways between the actuals in the app and forecasts in Excel. Would you suggest presenting the combined output in Excel or in Power BI? Oh, that's quite a question.
yeah, let me just read that back again.
Q&A.
um,
Some of these we can always put
so so the,
in
the 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 Excel versus Power BI debate is always tricky, but I would say use the right tool for what's easiest. So if you're just doing if you want a forecast and it's just for you to play around with it, you can just, have the actuals come through from Power BI and you can have those in Excel, right? Because you can connect your semantic model up to Excel, and then you can just update your numbers in Excel and you can kind of play around with that. Obviously, the problem with that is it's easy to do, but then you can't, it's then sharing it with everybody else is
well,
difficult. So
the
that's
purpose,
the
you're kind of
UBS thing.
defeating the
Yeah.
purpose of using Power BI, which is the shareability of it. So yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah, but you can still use Power BI for that part because at least you don't have to, go to my ERP system, download my actuals, do all the standard stuff. I can just connect up to my semantic model, which contains my logic to my actuals. And you can do things like something called detailed row expressions, where you can see numbers in Excel and you can double click on them and it will show you the first 1,000 records or the biggest 1,000 records. So there are things you can do. But yeah, generally people are always trying to do Power BI with Excel and Excel with Power BI. I just say use the right tools for they're different tools. Use them for what they're meant for.
Yeah.
Don't try and produce massive tables of 10,000 rows and 50 columns in Power BI. It's a waste of time. um, but also there are things that Power BI just does better than Excel in terms of security, in terms of larger volumes of data, etc.
There's a good question in the Q&A from Herbert about the single cell write back option. It doesn't look like an efficient approach for forecasting. Is this the beginning of more to come from Microsoft, or would you recommend other products for that? Yes, I agree. I don't think it would be suitable for wholesale forecasting. I think it's designed for adjustments, ad hoc adjustments. Would you agree, Chris?
100%. And the thing I'd say is it's a preview feature. This feedback is going to Microsoft. Microsoft are just starting down this journey. So yeah, single row feedback. But if bulk upload is kind of what you want, Obviously, that feedback I know has gone into Microsoft from different avenues. So yeah, it's very much stage one with this stuff.
Cool. There's a couple of other questions in the chat. One from Pavel on conditional formatting for the variance column.
Yes. Yeah, so I'd say again here, what we do is we use the account indicator that I showed within the challenges section. So the account indicator gives you the 1 or -1. You can use that for the conditional formatting. Basically, that tells you whether it's a revenue line or an expense line. So we use that within the conditional formatting in order to um, in order to determine whether it's a revenue expense, because that's all you need to know, right? Is it a revenue and expense? And if it's a revenue line, an increase is a good thing and a decrease is a bad thing. And if it's an expense line, an increase is a bad thing, it needs to be in red, and a decrease is a
Yeah.
good thing. It needs to be in green. So you just need to use that challenges section where you use the account type indicator. That's where you need it. Yeah.
Yeah. And one from Emilio saying, are UDFs once created in Power BI also pushed back into the semantic model in Fabric? So far, DAX written in Power BI desktop version doesn't find its way back to the semantic model in Fabric, but measures would have to be created in Fabric.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of misunderstanding here that I just need to kind of be clear on. So the Power BI model is something called the tabular object model. Within that sits all of your tables, all of your Power Query, all of your relationships, all your DAX, and now with the preview feature, it also includes the UDFs as well. So it all sits within the semantic model metadata in Tyndall language. So it is basically one big script of code. It's one thing. It all sits together. It's not it's just part of it. It's an extension to the model. In Microsoft are constantly evolving the tabular object model. So when we started in Power BI, it was very basic, and we've added more and more things like calculation groups, dynamic format strings. And now UDFs are coming in, and Microsoft are constantly adding in. So it's just part of the semantic model.
And Thomas has
I'm trying
asked,
to show it to you
yeah.
if I can. Um, Here we go. So here you can see, here's my semantic model. Calculation groups, cultures, that's used for multilingual. Functions, these are my UDFs that I've got in this model. And then measures, which I've got. Perspectives, they are used for different people who want to have different perspectives of the same data. So I might want to give somebody from the finance team, I might want to give access to a whole bunch of more complicated calculations like underlying and FX performance, but I might not want to show that to my basic user, right, who doesn't necessarily understand that, and then relationships, roles, security, and then the tables. So yeah, it's all within the semantic model. I see there's a question about not being able to access files in my book. I will check with the publisher. They did have that originally, but then they fixed it. So I'll go back and double check with the publisher on that.
And maybe just one final question from Thomas. How do you see the security for financial data using Fabric?
So what I've shown you today is row-based security. I think the
Mhm.
future of security is going to be at the file level.
Mm.
So so today, what I showed you was row level security. There's also column level security. Um, what I think the future of security will be is you have this file type called Delta
Mhm.
Parquet. That's the way your data is stored, and the security is applied at the Delta level. That's the direction that I think Microsoft want to go. The benefit of that is when you're building reports, you can use that same security. But say I'm a data scientist and I want to build a machine learning model. I I want, if you apply the security at the lowest level of granularity on the file level, the data scientist should get the same level of security. You better use the same security setup as somebody using Power BI, as somebody using a language called KQL, which is used for real time because it's at the delta level. So I think they'll want to push it further and further close to the actual data, because if it's stored at the data level, it propagates through everywhere. So that's how I see it evolving. And that is there today to an extent. Yeah.
And we have a rather annoying message from Firefly's note taker telling us that the meeting time is about to end. Thank you, Fireflies. I do realize that. So yes, we will have to finish it there. So thank you everybody for your fantastic participation and all of the questions. I think we managed to get through most of them. Thank you so much for that, Chris. I knew this was going to be a popular one. It was huge. So a massive amount of participation from everyone. So thank you so much, Chris. And yeah, thanks everyone. I'll see you again soon.